Right, well, you're all getting situated seated. So, where we are going to aim to end up with for our final piece, or at least our final head, is something on the level of this kind of fidelity. I've not got my image of my subject here, but this level of attention to detail, a level of attention to an anatomical detail, this is the stuff we really need to make sure we're doing. And it's not that hard, like getting to this point is not that hard, it's just time consuming. Because a lot of what makes a face actually that person's face is a lot of like the minor detail stuff. It's the slight movement of the eye ridges, you know, if they're a little bit too high, if they're a little bit too low, the shape of the ears, to really nail likenesses as well, it's the asymmetry of the face. So for instance, Laura's got a lip which is slightly to the right on her bottom lip. Her nose is slightly crooked. She's not that kind of like crazy deformed, but you know, there's slight differentials in people's face. And you'll have it for each one of your faces, especially like Trejo. He's got a very asymmetrical face. And it's all down to them craggy lines. Blunt, Smith, and Yao have got fairly symmetrical faces, but there will be stuff you can find to offset stuff. It'll be spots, it'll be whatever, it'll be, you know, maybe there's more wrinkles on one side of the face than the other. There's tons of stuff. You've just got to make sure you're paying attention. And it's also why you want to have those really nice high resolution images so you can get in there and see them. But we've all got to start somewhere. So where do we start? Let's find out. So if I get rid of this, and I get my starting point. Right. This is where we're going to start. This is all we need for the very beginning. We don't need anything more than this. Just a general non-script head. And my subject is Lance Henriksen, so I'm not going to do anyone that anyone else has done. And all I've got here, like I could have a body, simple body, but all I've got here is just my head, my neck. I've outlined some mastoid muscles, and I've got some ears. And these are all separate as well. So I know that many of you have got your heads which have kind of got all your connected bits and stuff, which is totally fine to do, but you can also work like this for a long time. The reason I might suggest working like this for likeness stuff is that you're going to be doing a lot of shape changes, you're going to be making adjustments all the time, and we're going to be doing a lot of peer-to-peer feedback. I would say the only reason my Laura looks the way it does is because I'm asking people for feedback. Like I showed you on Tuesday where it started off, and I thought, yeah, it looks like Laura Bailey. Does not look like Laura Bailey at all. But now, seeing as I've gone to Discord groups, I'm on the Outgang one, I put that in Whip, I've gone to my friend groups and said, like, look at this, how can I change it? And I got a load of feedback. I was like, holy shit, that's a lot of stuff that I didn't see. And so I needed to make a load of changes. And it was a bit of a pain because, you know, I had my neck connected, I had my ears connected, and sometimes I had to kind of like make such an adjustment that ruined the work I'd done into the neck, it ruined the work I'd done in my ears. So, you know, I might keep these bits separate for a while. Same for the body. I might keep like my upper torso separate from my lower torso, my legs separate from my... Max, calm down.
Already connected everything. Well,
Calm down. If you have connected anything, was my next sentence, it's totally fine. It's totally fine because it's just... Yeah, it's just totally fine. The only reason you keep stuff separate is just if you're going to make any massive changes, it's easier to make those changes and not have it impact stuff around it. If they are connected,
is there any way that you could separate it if you wanted to?
Yeah. All you have to do is mask off the thing and then go to split. Split, masked or unmasked. Don't really matter which one you do on those. So yeah, you could like mask off your arm and then split a mask parts. It's going to split it off into its own little thing. That's all you need to do. Dead simple. If they are connected, it doesn't matter whatsoever. But for me, it's just controllability. Some people don't like working with lots of separate bits because they want everything as one big homogeneous group. What this does as well, quite nicely, especially if you're doing someone who's got a lot of very, very defined muscle structure, like in the neck, or they've got big deltoids or whatever, is you can use these separate primitives or basic shapes to make those shapes as a floating element and then kind of shape that and then blend it in, like Dynamesh it in and stuff. So, we've got something like this from the very beginning. Basic head, doesn't look like my subject. Let's get some, there you go. The only thing I've really made sure I'm paying attention to is my anatomy. I'm making sure that it's a skull, that it's a face, that I've got a nose, that it's strong and shapely. I've got a jawline, which is strong and shapely. I've got the rhythms coming from the top of the ear round into the cheek, which is that 2D rhythm that Brody probably would have gone like the. Did Brody go over that where you got the top of your ear, sweep
Yeah.
down past your cheekbones into the side of your chin, as well as the zygomatic arch there. I'm just making sure that I've got all these very, very important structures outlined. And then obviously, you know, my neck is the right size, my ear's in the right position. You know, though it might change, that everything kind of lines up with the golden measurements, like top of my ear, top of my eyebrow, bottom of my ear, middle of my nose, and stoof. Because then when I've done that, I can then look at my reference, and I've taken a bit of time with my reference and just done a bit of a draw over of some important stuff, and I've colour coded it. So the red one here is my basic muscle structure, my basic face shape. So the planes of the face, you can see I'm pulling that Riley method again. The width of the mouth compared to the eyes. Some people, their mouth, I think Will Smith has got quite a wide mouth. I think Trey's got quite a wide mouth. They might not line up with the middle of the eyeballs. They might be a little bit wider. So I'm getting all my measurements in there. Like how wide is my nose compared to my eyes? What is the general shape of my nose from the front? Is it boxy? Is it quite pyramid? Is it from the side? Is it particularly hooked, or is it quite upward turned, like a bit of a pig nose kind of thing? I'm just trying to answer all the shapes in there. And then my blue one here, that's my fat deposit stuff. That's stuff I really, really like. So the little round pieces of fat at the corner of the mouth there, the Marlon Brando fat deposits. Things like coming out from the tear duct, the little strand of fat which separates from the nose, the cheekbone there. From the side, you're not really getting too much of it. This one in orange, I'm thinking about the planes of the face. So connected a little bit to this one, but I'm thinking much more about, especially with this dynamic lighting, where am I getting my flat, Asaro-esque kind of planes, which are also going to help me kind of nail the likeness, because I'm kind of understanding the angles of the side of the nose, is particularly wide, it's particularly steep. The flat points here, so like the front of the lobe and the side of the head here, is this a quite a large distance, or is this a closed distance? And then this last one here is more like the details stuff I want to kind of be aware of, like big detail stuff. So I'm thinking about, especially with Lance, he's got these like little creases either side of his face. I'm thinking about the particular crease underneath the chin, and then the shape of the fleshy skin to the fatty skin kind of separation, and how that kind of wraps around. So I'm trying to get as much information as I can in my brain and in my eyes as soon as I can. So at that point, I can just start sculpting. So this will be off on the other screen, obviously. There is one thing we can do to help us in the early stages to quickly mash in a lot of this stuff. And it's something I've shown a couple of people, but on the UI at the very top, you've got see through here. If you were to slide that, you start making the whole UI semi-transparent. Now what I'm going to do with that is bring my Pure F in, make this particular head a little bit big, put it about there, and just make sure this is set to, yeah, cool. And what I'm going to do is just set that to slightly transparent, and just try and get my head in there. Now obviously, the FOV of the camera that's been shot on isn't the same FOV that is in my scene. The head might be slightly kind of tilted. I've tried making the head as straight as I can in Photoshop. But what I'm going to do is just try and line this up and try and nail some of these shapes and some of these forms. Now what I'm not going to do, underlining this very, very hard, is I'm not going to rely on this to do the entire job. This is literally just the initial stages, just to help block in these shapes very quickly. I can't rely on doing this for the whole thing. It's like this whole tracing method. So I'm going to line my eyes up. I'm going to get my eyes in pretty good position. So, like that. Like that. And literally with the move brush, nice big move brush, start to push and pull stuff around. I'm here separate, so I'm going to switch into those and just mashing them in. and I can just keep. Because one thing as well that's going to be very important to kind of keep aware, to keep an eye on is how soft a person's face and how hard a person's face is. Or you might have soft elements and hard elements of a face. So, for instance, Lance's lower jaw isn't a super chiseled jaw, it's a little bit rounder, but then he's got quite defined upper face area here. So I'm going to have to make sure that I'm getting these forms in there. Now he's got quite a skeletal brow as well, so I'll make sure that I'm trying to get that in there. And then, I'll spend a bit of time doing that, maybe no more than say 5 to 10 minutes, because you don't want to commit to it too much. And then I might jump back to PureF, move up to the side view, and then just do the same thing. Go to the side, try and get this kind of scaled up. Use my eyes as my little guide. Oops. And then try and just move stuff around. Now also I've got to think about, is his head slightly tilted forward in that profile view or is it slightly tilted back? So again, not committing to it, I'm just using it as a guide. And I'll just quickly jump back and forth. Just quickly. And I'm also got to think planar. I've got to think flat at the very beginning. Thinking flat, no smoothing. I want no one using smooth tool at all in the beginning stages. Just use the move tool, the dam standard, and the clay buildup. Well, that's what I use. Any sort of mask making brush, so the standard brush, the clay blob brush, whatever you want to use. But don't use a smooth brush. Work with those flat lines. Work with those flat angles. So move that out of the way for now. So that should give me something I can start to work with. And a lot of this is literally just down to not looking at not looking at your reference for a long time. Keep looking at your reference, and every 20 seconds, 10 seconds, just look at it, especially on the part that you're doing. So at the very beginning, I might go around with the Trim Dynamic brush. It's a lovely little brush, and just start to flatten off, looking at this profile angle here. Just try and match some of those angles. So he's not got a particularly his nose hasn't got any bony features, it's quite a straight nose with a bit of an overhang there. So he's not really got the piggy nose there, he's got more of a flat angle. Very straight, no real curve, concave or convex to the upper lip philtrum area. So nice and straight. So I'll stick with the Trim Dynamic for now. Just flatten some areas off. So here I'm kind of working around on his cheeks. If I'm working my 3/4 view, then I'll find one of my 3/4 views that I have and try and match those angles. It's all just about looking at this, looking at this, looking at this, looking at this, and just thinking in your head about angles all the time. And this is the bit that you need to take your time on, and you need to be very, very subjective about what you do, and you need to be asking yourself questions all the time. Like, is this big enough? Is this long enough? Is it too long, too big, too short, too fat? Is it too soft? Like, look how angular that face is. It's very, very angular. And I'm over-defining some stuff, though that's not me putting it in the mouth, that's me getting that little under the lip section in there with the dam standard. No real wrinkles or scarring or anything like that just yet. I'm just getting these bone structures. So like I said, he's got that quite skeletal eye area. So making sure that there is quite a depression inside there. Trying to match his forehead. So there's my profile. So his forehead's quite flat, but not quite as big. And I might even go in there with a Trim Dynamic and just flatten off some bits. So here as well is where I'm going to be thinking very anatomically. So thinking back to my basic anatomy structures. So the shape of the lobe there, going into the zygomatic arch, and then going into the side of the plane of the head there. You have got this, like, on the skull, this slight lobe and then indentation, then the bone structure of the zygomatica is this kind of orbital ridge area there. So I'll define that fairly early doors and try and keep that in, because again, some of the lighting might kind of show that off. See if we kind of, like here, that slight light in there is giving me the indication of this little ridge line I'm making. And that might be pushed back to near invisible later on, but these are the small details we need to be thinking about when we're doing this sort of stuff. So, get that in there for now. And I can also look at, if I've got a neck or whatever, I can start looking at, does that make sense? If you're doing a female character, is the neck thin enough? If you're doing like a particularly bulky male character, is it wide enough? I know Treo's probably got a very wide neck. Blunt and Yo's probably got very thin necks. So make sure that that's also balancing. How, if you can even think about when you're doing your draw overs, like if you're getting like a really nice, quite neutral front pose, you can see the neck. Where does the neck line up on the head? Is there any elements you can find on your reference to be like, okay, then yeah, the neck lines up with, say, the corner of the eyes, or the neck lines up with the outside of the jaw, something like that. Same for the profile. Where does the Adam's apple line up? If you could just draw like a line up, does it line up with kind of there? Does it line up here? How far forward? How far back of the neck? So it's a lot of just observational skills that we've been doing throughout the year, but they really, really matter at this point. Oops. Really, really matter. And take your time with this bit as well, because this is the initial stages where you nail the shape of the head. There's nothing to do with wrinkles, nothing to do with skin pores or anything like that. If we get this right, everything else is very, very easy, and like I said, it just takes time. In these stages as well, what I'll be doing is looking at the eye shape, and even in this early stage, like low resolution as well, I'm keeping it in the low on my eye here. 32, but the whole thing is 86, so very, very low. So I'll be thinking about this eye shape here and just trying to, well, maybe this is a little bit too low res, but trying to get this kind of eye shape in there. Because that's also probably the biggest thing to think about is the shape of a person's eye. So, for instance, like Lance has got quite a big eye. It's flatter on the bottom, rounder on the top. And that line, if his head was straight, the tear duct to the epicanthic fold is fairly linear. There's no kind of like cat eye effect or droop. But then I'm also looking at how the actual epicanthic fold there, how deep is that? Is there one? Or is it very subtle? Is it very deep? In this case, very, very deep. Treo, he's quite heavy lidded. So his is going to be like more masked. Yao's is going to be very, very flat, but then her epicanthic fold is closer to the actual eyelid ridge, where your eyelashes are. I can't think off the top of my head what Blunts and Smiths are like, but that's something you've really got to look at. So, and again, I'm not really worrying too much about this kind of information just yet. I'm just thinking about the basic information, how pointy is the tear duct, and that kind of jazz. So I can even start trying to get that in, and it's going to look messy at first. Don't worry, it's going to look messy. So. Getting that information in, because when you get the eyelids in there, the eyebrows, you can start looking at everything in the right position. From the side, is my tear duct too far forward? So my eyes are more like, if I'm looking from below, more like that rather than wrapping. They should be wrapping around an orb in space. And remesh that. Ooh, that's too low res. So let's just pump that up to say 250. Yeah. Okay, so that's gone up a little bit, but it's still really low res. Because at this stage as well, what I can do is get this kind of indentation there early on. Now obviously, because we're dynameshing, this might close. Every time we re-dynamesh, it might close. As long as we get that feature in there, as we go higher resolutions, it's going to maintain, the gap's going to maintain a little bit more. But then when we retopologize, we're not going to be dynameshing after that anyway. So that's always going to maintain regardless of what kind of subdivision level we're at. So smashing it in with the like clay buildup or something. So I can check. that, I can be like, okay, that's nice and broad. Start thinking about the actual weight of the eyelids, eyebrows, bringing that round. And then, I'm bring it back. What's happening is the eyelids are coming around to the eyebrows here, the eyelids. I've got like a really, really nice kind of fold in the corner there. So, use like the trim dynamic just to slice it in. Needs to be a bit, there you go. Slice that in a little bit. And it's going to look crispy, like I said, it's going to look a bit shit at the very beginning. But that's because we're working at a subdivision level or a resolution where it's not affording us nice clean data, which is what we want. We just want to be able to control the forms. So I can see here my eyes are too wide, too far apart. So I'm going to bring those in a little bit. My cheeks are probably a little bit too puffy. He's got quite shallow cheeks. So I'll probably start bringing that in a little bit, see how it looks in 3/4. Okay. So you can see that it's looking more of like a cartoon at first. But you're literally just pushing and pulling and nudging. And that's all we really need to start off with at first, is just pushing and pulling and nudging and trying to get these shapes in. So what I'm not going to do is just start the process, because again, this will take hours. Like I could sit here for the next 6 hours and not really move a million miles away from here because I'm just nudging stuff around. What I am going to do is go to our VLE and find this head. There you go. So this is a 2-hour sketch, and I'm not doing a likeness of Natalie Portman or whoever that was. But I'm also going a little bit of a different method as well, just to get the base mesh. But there'll be a point where I just start nudging and changing. It looked quite manly at first. So you see, it's very, very, very messy. In this case, I'm keeping everything together. I'm just getting those ridges. So I'm looking at the shape of the cheeks from the profile, as well as what it's looking at from the front. What's the shape of the skulls like? I should be really looking at that more because this is far too big. But I'm trying to nail those overall structures. Like I said, it looks quite manly for a long time. Because in that case, I'm not focusing on the right things. You can see there, I've knocked back all that detail because I don't need it. So I've gone from being quite messy with mouth and stuff to knocking it all the way back. So a lot of it is just kind of this kind of stuff, just nudging with the move brush. And there I've taken a bit of that data away and actually brought back, so I've worked the eyes a little bit and brought like the closed eye kind of shape in there, try and make at least the shape of what an eyelid would be while closed, because then that'll help me kind of define the corner of the eyes, the underneath the eye, and then I can make it open later on. There you go, so I'm going in there, making the eye open. Looks horrendous, doesn't it? Looks like a pile of crap.
Like cold for a second.
Yeah. But this is what I'm saying, like you don't need to worry about it looking perfect straight away. All I'm doing here is I'm nudging all the time, changing the scales. Because as you work through stuff, from the very beginning, we've only got enough data and enough visual data to really inform us with like certain things, like the silhouettes, the shape of ears and stuff. We've not really got much in there to inform like really, really solid data. It's only as we kind of keep working through, it's like, oh, now that I put the nose in there, I've worked the nose a little bit. How does that fit on the face in general? But how does that kind of relate to my subject? Is my nose too broad, too whatever? So now this is where I start to nail the female form a bit more. This is where I start getting them little fat deposits around the cheeks. Got the Marlon Brando deposits there. I'm starting to define this nice little almost like a sharp line between like the jaw and then the fat deposit there. Again, it looks very severe for a while. I'm getting my eyes in there. It looks bad from the side. But I'm working, and eventually it'll start to come together. But even then, like, this is starting to come together a little bit. Not great though. I think there's a point where I kind of just smack it really hard with like a move brush. Yeah, I think it was there. My neck was too wide, too deep. And I'm still working Dynamesh as well, so I'm not really committing to any real data that I'm not afraid to get rid of. You know, I can go in there with the clay buildup and start smashing stuff around. If my neck was separate to my head, I'd have less fear of attacking the neck because I know that it's not really going to have an effect on my head. See there, I'm just pushing in that epicanthic fold, defining a little bit of that under eye, a little bit of this subcutaneous fat in the neck. Now we are actually going to be, well, sculpt the mouth closed for now, just to make it easy, but eventually we will be making mouth bags for these characters. This is more important when we get closer to doing the retopology section, but we're going to have an interior of the mouth because we're going to have teeth and stuff. Plus me doing some basic clothing. So you can see it takes a long time. This is 2 hours of me kind of speed sculpting, my kind of version of speed sculpting. And I got to something which was okay. It still needs a lot of work, especially if I'm trying to go for Natalie Portman or her. Is that Halle?
It's Cara Delevingne.
Kylie Levine. I just saw her, I was like, oh, this is a nice face to sculpt. I don't know who Kylie Levine is.
She's a model.
Oh, she's a model, okay.
Also, she's bald, so she has no hair to work with.
Well, that's why I chose these images. I don't know why I was trying to use that Purif then. Because I could see the head better on those. Which is why I wanted to have like more of a head view on these. But like with someone that has like quite severe bone structure, like very visible bone structure.
Was Danny Trejo bald at any point?
Don't think so.
There's pictures with him with his hair like black.
But yeah, there will be some, like, it's quite hard to find like head wrap. Will Smith is easy because he's been bald since the moon was a dot. Yeah, the rest of them have got hair, and I think I've always had hair and never not had hair. So yeah, but that's where we can use our anatomical knowledge and think like, okay then, if I'm looking at a reference of say Emily Blunt and I see her hair's kind of pulled up in a bun at the back, obviously that hair's going to have mass, it's going to add length, it's going to add like a size to the head. Can I use my brain and actually extrapolate what's going on underneath? For like Trejo, Yao and Blunt, as long as you just get a good skull structure, the exact shape of the skull doesn't really matter because you're going to be covering it up anyway. Will Smith is quite important because obviously he's very, very visible on his head. But as you can see from this, it takes time to get to something workable. And like I said, this is me speed sculpting. And again, I have been doing this for a very, very long time, so I can get to places a bit quicker. Don't worry about looking crap for ages, because it will, and it has to. But what I want to do is just start off with something like this and just work the forms and move around the model. Don't get fixated on like one part for too long. You know, work the eyes a little bit, and then after about 10-20 minutes, if you find yourself at a good position, work something else. Be moving around the model all the time. Don't get stuck in, see, this is the biggest one people do. Don't get stuck in the front view or in the side view. Because you can make something look really nice from the side, but then when you go to the front view, because you've not been taking into consideration what's happening here, it looks completely off. So always move around your model. Don't get too close up to, I know I was a little bit close up with the eyes then, but try not to get too close up. If anything, always work with the head completely visible like this. Because when you're painting, if you're doing like the beginning strokes of a large painting, you're not like that on the canvas, like choking down on your brush. Your brush is at the end of your finger like that, and you're doing big gestural strokes. Same jazz with this, you know, don't get choked in and like get really close in. Sit back a little bit. Especially when you got who's using a Cintiq? Show of hands. If you're using Cintiqs, it's really easy to fall into like that on your Cintiq. Try to sit back and work at a distance. For obviously people using tablets, it's a bit easier because you're naturally this far away. But even then, try and keep a distance. Think about the forms more than anything. Change the materials. So here I've just got the basic material, which has got some really nice shading. There's some materials which are crap for detail, but like the chalk material, we lose all of that shadow. So at that point, I'm not necessarily worrying about the shadow stuff because I'm losing it. I'm thinking about the silhouette. There's the thin outline and the thick outline. That can give you a good idea about how the forms are turning. So how this works, it's interesting to know why this is working like it is. This is basically, it's using what we call a Fresnel to define the edges. As a surface turns away from us, at a certain angle, it's going to create a line. So here I can see that the line, that obviously that surface there is turning away, obviously this surface here is turning away. But what we're getting is kind of like a very rudimentary sketch. So that's sometimes good to, in the early stages, to see if you're getting some of the key shapes. And the thick outline's a little bit thicker, but this is like, essentially it's the same thing, but the Fresnel is bigger. So I've seen people use this to kind of help them get forms together. And also you've just got flat. So there you're losing all the detail, you're just getting silhouettes. It's grey because that's just a separate subtool. So you can use that. You've also obviously got this upstairs. So always changing your materials. Don't get locked into using any, like I know some people get locked into using like Polyskin or one of these. Each material will give you a different read. Like I'm a sucker for getting stuck with green metallic. So I'm forcing myself to use like basic material a lot nowadays. But you know, use the basic material. After 20 minutes, change to Madcap 5. After 20 minutes, change to Polyskin. The whole visual changes from each of them. Because each of them are going to be grabbing certain things. This one's really good at getting your edge highlighted and your interior shadows, which can help you define stuff. Like literally, now that I put Polyskin on, I've just noticed that my skull is misshapen at the top. And I didn't really notice that with base mesh, the basic material on, because my eyes weren't grabbing that information. So it's very important that we change different materials. Oops, I do. Now, a couple of other things before we actually kick off. It's going to be a nice short one here because we know everything already. We know all the tools. We should know our observations, and it's just about taking time, so we're not doing really much. A couple of things within ZBrush which are really fun to do. It's how I got these two images here. These cool little turnarounds, creating these, and changing this guy up here. This is all down to something in your preferences. And it's down at the bottom called Camera View. If I turn that on and off, you see we lose that guy at top right. That size is literally the size of that, so I can make it really big or whatever. The next, you can flick through and change all the different things. So that's a standard one. We can go through and use a load of... I don't know why that one is useful at all. This one's a camera, which is useful, I guess. There you go. But if I want to make one of these, I'll just use this head. I made the skull by loading up the skeleton tool, getting rid of everything except the skull. And the only thing you have to do is make sure that your pivot point is in the middle of the object. If your pivot point's like up here, that's going to be where the camera rotates around. And it means that your head's going to be like, your skull's going to be half off the canvas. So just make sure that your pivot point is in the middle of your object. Like that. And all you got to do is preferences, make camera view. There you go. So then right there in your textures, you'll have your heads, and you can just export that out as a JPEG. You can make it whatever size you want, but there, you've got all the heads. So you can even do that for your head at certain points. So like when you get to like end of stage one, do one of those. And then when you get to like the point where you're getting all the really nice details in, you can do one then, because then that's just a nice way of looking at your mesh. But for me, it's a really good tool to get these nice angles in there. So when I'm working, I can be like, okay, if I'm working the back of the head, And in this case, maybe I'm doing someone who's very like Sylvester Stallone. This is like closer to his kind of thing. I could be like, okay, then if I'm doing this really awkward angle, I can use that and be like, okay, yeah, I can see how you're getting this little indentation shadow at the bottom of the jaw, where the flesh is kind of wrapping round down. How much of the back of the jaw can I see? How much of the back of the ear can I see? And then when you're doing like maybe you're as just angling around, like, okay, does it look right from the top? Very, very useful, incredibly useful. And that's just a basic head mesh, and that's obviously the skull from the skeleton tool. But I'm always going to be going back and forth for that. Also, what you can do is if you bring in the skull into the scene, I'll not have the skull here, but I will duplicate this and just make it look a little bit different. There you go. We know that's the different one. If I bring in the skull and I basically put it in my head position and have my head sculpt in there, what I can do is go to transform and then go to split screen. You might have seen me do this a couple of times. And if I set that split screen to 1, I split the screen. So on the right is my active sculpt, so that's what I'm actually working on. But if I turn, and also obviously everything is invisible there, but if I turn on the eyeball of this head, then that appears on the left. And what I can do is just make, if I've got like a skull on the left there, or a better head or whatever, I can look around and be like, okay, if this is a skull, I can look at this and be like, okay, does that look like there is a bone structure underneath there? Does the back of the skull look like it should do on the left hand side? So you can use it as a bit of a reference guide. Or you can do like a before and after. So you could have like a save point. If you're thinking, right, I've got to make a big change of something, but I'm not sure. You could have your standard head there, and then you could duplicate off, make the adjustments, and then you could be like, okay, then which of the two makes sense? Have I made a good adjustment, or is the one on the left better than the adjustments I've made? So there's always reasons for using these kind of split screens. Let's transform and turn that back off. There we go. And one of the number one things in this that I know you guys are actually really good with this anyway, but feedback on this is going to be very, very, very important. Not just from us, obviously post it in the group and stuff, but posting it to other, like if anyone's on the Outgang Discord, post it in the whip. It'd be funny if we just kind of like bombarded Laura's fucking Discord with a load of like Blunts, Trejos, Yows and Smiths. Because then as a group we could get banned and it'd be great. But any sort of like art groups you're on online, you know, maybe you're on Outgang. Is anyone on the Outgang Discord? No? On the Sketchfab one. The Outgang one is really good. I'll just show you why. So, okay, there you go. Yeah, in the whip section, there's always going to be people posting stuff, and people will always have. There's so many people on there. And there's a lot of like very, very knowledgeable people. This is where I found out about how to fix the streaming issue from the other day. I posted it within 10 minutes. Someone was like, "Oh, it's this, by the way." But yeah, you can go through. And some people just sometimes just say something. Some people will actually do draw overs. You'll probably, if anyone does post anything, you'll get something of this guy. This guy talks cryptically and isn't very helpful, but is very, very like this guy is actually very, very good at what he does. It's pretty sick. It's pretty sick. So yeah, the Outgang Discord, really good. As well as our Discord, and then he posted to people who aren't artists. You know, if you get to a point where, like, don't post anything like this because they won't know what looking at with this. But if you get to a point where it's starting to look like that person, like send it to your gran and be like, "Gran, does this look like Danny Trejo?"
My family needs no help with feedback with my art.
It doesn't matter, because sometimes it needs someone who hasn't got the brain of ours to look at something and point something out. Because as artists, it's like when you give a musician, like, if you give me, I'm a bass player, but if you give me a guitar, I'm going to have an understanding of how to work it. Like, I'm the only 3D artist of my friends, so if I post stuff to my 2D artist, they're still going to understand how to give feedback on 3D because it's adjacent. But my mum is a finance person. She works in like finance and administration or some shit. She didn't have a fucking clue about art. But she might be able to say something's wrong with something. She might not be able to give you technical breakdowns of why, but she'll be able to say that, oh, this this is wrong, this doesn't look quite right, because they're looking at it with an unbiased view. Of course, some people will be just like, I don't know what I'm looking at, and then that's useless.
That is like mom.
But you never know